do this. Looks like, I need to edit this title. And Reuben, your last name Ghose, that's the correct pronunciation?
It's actually gauche.
Gauche.
Gauche, like left.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gauche. Okay, good. Glad I asked you that.
This is true.
Yeah. Oh, his first name is not Rich. Okay, hold on. Okay. So we're live now, and now I'm going to get the link somehow. Post it. Here we go. Link. And I'm going to tag you both in it. I'm just going to post on Facebook that we're going live.
Oh.
There you go. I wish there were like some way to automatically do this.
Yeah, it's such a process. There's so much stuff going on.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's tag people. Michael.
There you go.
Reuben. Okay, done. Post. All right, and everybody's recording on their DAWs.
I'm just gonna double check.
Yep.
Yes. Thank
Okay,
God.
so we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll all clap at the same time so that I can
One,
sync it.
4. The 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then you'll hear. Actually, that's coming through, right? You can hear that music.
Yeah, we heard that.
Okay,
We heard that.
so
yeah.
you'll hear the title music. I'll do a little intro, and then we're off to the races.
Cool.
Okay, here we go. So, clapping on 1, 2, 3. Well, you guys were perfectly in sync with each other there. Nice.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
My hair's a mess. Look at this. Woo!
Yeah. So yeah. Hey guys, what's going on? It's the Music Guy podcast. We're back for another episode. My name's Al Rowe. I'm a music guy. I play guitar, I sing, I make records, I write songs. I'm broadcasting to you from a brand new location. Please don't mind the disarray of my current place here. I moved yesterday to the beaches in Toronto, so I'm very excited to be setting up a new place here. My co-host, partner in crime, coming at you all the way from Sarnia, Ontario. Oh, I'm sorry, Whitby, Ontario. It's
Sarnia.
I don't know.
Where did
I'm just
Sarnia
gonna make it.
from?
Well, because I said Ajax last week.
Oh, I see.
I'm just gonna make up a different town.
That's a good idea.
People
I
might
like that.
confuse
I like
with,
that.
With
That's a
Whitby.
tradition.
Yeah, I'll say Oshawa one time, and you'll jump through the screen and strangle me, probably.
Ugh.
It's Michael Hebbs.
I am Michael Hebbs. You're not wrong.
How
That
are you,
intro
man?
was soul crushingly loud.
Oh,
it was like,
I'm so sorry.
bam. That's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not your fault.
Well, yeah, it is.
Um,
Actually,
It is, but don't change it. I'm just saying it because it's fun
Gotcha.
times.
I got you.
But I'm good. I borrowed a microphone, a Royer 121 from one of my friends, and I'm gonna have fun with that, and hopefully not break it because they're fucking sensitive. But yeah, other than that, I'm excited to talk to a mastering engineer. Actually,
Yeah, let's get right to that. Our special
Yeah.
guest today, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's Reuben Ghosh, owner of Mojito Mastering in Toronto, Ontario as well. We're all sort of in the Toronto area here. Reuben's mastered a ton of music over the last nearly a decade, I guess, at this point.
Yeah.
some of the names: Mono Whales, Tall Tale, I Am Hill, Alex St. Kitts, Curdy, Accent. Reuben's done a ton of mastering for us agenda guys as we've been sort of making records over the last few years. So Beverly Mahood, Dylan Wallace, John Anderson, among a bunch of other great artists are all sort of on that list. So welcome, Reuben, and thank you so much for taking the time to come in, come and do the show. How are you, man?
Oh, great. Thanks for having me.
Could you give, I guess, maybe people just the Cole's notes on you and what Mojito is and what you do. Sort of this podcast is sort of about how people make a living in the music industry. You know, maybe they're super famous, but I feel like that's how most people see the music industry. It's you're either famous or you're broke. And those two things are very,
a little bit of both.
You know, very possible both. But I think there's a lot of us who are just making a living, doing a job that we love in an industry that we love. Can you give people, paint a picture for people of what you do and who you are?
Yeah, well, I'm a mastering engineer, basically a solo mastering engineer, solo shop. Yeah, as far as, I mean, the reason I started Mojito was that I did want to offer something in the city that was a little bit more approachable for, like you said, some like independent artists that might not always have the backing to try something else, but still maintain the level of quality that you would get anywhere else. And that's kind of how it started and why I decided to start doing it on my own. And I've basically been doing that since, I'd say, about 2012, full time. My background, so I did a music degree at McGill University, jazz piano, music technology, and then a sound recording degree also at McGill, the master's program there.
Nice.
The Tonmeister. And spent a little time in Banff, doing a work study program there. And then, I did a lot of internships, early on in my career at different studios, mostly in Toronto. Spent a lot of time at the CBC. Spent some time recording at Humber, which is how you and I met, right, Al?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
And I also did some work in post production, doing advertising and that type of stuff for a while. Right. The whole time I was just mastering, basically on the side for a long time. Back in 2007, I spent a little bit of time working at a studio called the Lacquer Channel here in Toronto.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's kind of where I got my start mastering itself. I wasn't there for very long, but it kind of gave me a background at the time on how real mastering worked and what a studio that works with major label artists and how they operate and how you deal with that.
Yeah.
And, since I left there, what would happen was, since I had that background, other engineers who were mixing or recording something and their clients didn't have a budget to go somewhere else, they'd say, yeah, well, Reuben kind of likes doing this. Why don't we see if he'll do it? And I would just say, sure, why not? I wasn't really set up for it at the time, but I kind of did it. And that just kind of grew. It just kind of grew organically, where people just started calling me. And eventually I was getting more calls for mastering than other things and decided to do it full time.
Right.
So you mentioned Tonmeister. I've heard that before. Could you explain what that is? Because I
think it literally means like master of sound. Like I think in German.
There you go.
I could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
The idea of it comes from I think it was developed in the 60s in Germany, mainly for classical recording, because back then I think people have heard the stories of the Abbey Road engineers with the lab coats and all that, and I think that's mostly just myth. Okay. But still, a lot of the engineers back then were more technical. They often didn't have a musical background. So the Tonmeister program, when it started back then, was to combine people who have a musical background. Back then, it would be a classical music background with a recording degree, and so that when you're recording, you're a pianist or a violin, you're a violinist, and you want to record something. The person you're recording with actually has an idea of what should be happening musically, not just from a technical background.
Yeah.
It's something we take for granted now. You know, I think most engineers now have a musical background, but back then that wasn't the way it worked.
Yeah, it's funny because engineer, like you always hear that term, like recording engineer, and like I know some like engineers, and it's like there are some recording engineers that have that mindset where it is very technical, but it's like engineer is like a different thing, you know?
Yeah, we are not real engineers at all.
We're not building any bridges.
No, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, I've heard a lot. I've interacted with a lot of people who are like, yeah, don't call me an engineer because I'm like that's not a real term for like what we do or whatever. It's like, yeah, you know how to.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I because I'm ignorant. I don't know where you draw the line in terms of when like an engineer becomes like an official term for somebody. I guess they need a certain like degree or qualification or something. But it's kind of funny how that word has sort of found its way into our sphere when, you know, it's guys.
Just don't call them sound guys.
Yeah.
They don't like that when you just call them sound guys.
Sound guy, yeah.
Reuben the sound guy.
I think Tone Meister is kind of a nice, it sounds more...
Yep. Master of tone.
It's not engineer, but it sounds more impressive than sound guy.
Right.
So it's like a program, though, I guess, like and like a method, which is cool. Instead of just just listen to recordings and make them sound good. It's like, well, fuck. Like,
yeah, it's supposed to be a little bit more structured.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right on, man. So what drew you to mastering as a process, as something you were really interested in and wanted to take on?
I just found it fascinating. So like when I started, I think like most people, I got interested in recording and production when I was in high school, playing in bands and trying to record my own stuff. And this is like the late 90s. There wasn't much on the internet, but whatever I could find, there were a couple sites that talked about mastering, and it was just it was fascinating to me, just black art, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can you do these small little things but have such a big impact? And so throughout school and throughout the beginnings of my career, I was just fascinated with it. So I would always master the stuff I was already recording and producing on my own. Any bands I played in, I would master the stuff on my own if we were recording it ourselves. And it was just a fascinating thing. And I think for whatever reason, it just clicked a bit more with me. Like, I'm also kind of an audiophile. I like messing around with speakers and amps and that type of thing. And I think the mindset fit me more than recording and mixing.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'm just a better mastering engineer than I ever was a mixing engineer or recording engineer.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, fair enough.
You said you were an audiophile, and one thing that I might have read this on your website, you built some of the stuff that you run your stuff through. So like you build gear as well in addition to that? That is so cool. So you just how did you get into that? Like, you just started
that was self-taught. Yeah. So the first thing I built was my DAC that I sent the audio through for the analog chain, and it's a tube and transformer based digital audio converter. And that one was a kit, so it was a little bit easier to start with. Yes. But once I had that under my belt, I started building some stuff point to point, like completely from scratch. And it's kind of fun. I wish I had more time for it, but
yeah.
You could do like full-time releasing products. That'd be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
really neat.
Nuts. Like, so you can do that just at home. Like, what sort of tools do you need to even do that? Is it just a soldering gun and that's kind of, you're good to go, or?
Well, the soldering gun's probably the most important one.
Yeah.
And a good one definitely makes a difference. I tried doing this stuff earlier when I was younger, and I couldn't afford a good one. Gave up pretty quick. But over time, you start to realize, okay, well, this tool would be really helpful, even if it's not necessary. And so you just start gathering these little things here and there. So there's a lot more to it than the soldering iron, but not a lot either.
Yeah. You can like bare bones get by.
Like,
with
you don't need you don't need a workshop necessarily to tinker with gear.
No, the first couple ones I did, I just did on my coffee table.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. That's super cool.
Eventually I did get a workbench because that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
Are the parts like expensive? Like the one thing that I wonder about, like with gear manufacturing, so you get like, and we'll talk about this later, like gears can be so expensive, like speakers and like preamps. Are they that expensive because of this is our patented design, or is it like the parts in this are just expensive, or to make it is so complicated?
It honestly, it depends on the piece of gear and the company.
Yeah.
Like you'll see
Yeah.
some pieces of gear where you go, "Why does this cost this much?" It's like
Yeah.
nothing in here that costs. And then there's others where you're like I've looked at, not I wouldn't say clone, but to try to make something similar, and you go, "Oh, okay, I get why this is really really expensive." You
That makes
start looking
sense.
at some of the parts, and yeah, and you
Yeah.
can go crazy. And like the audiophile world, there's some
Oh,
pretty expensive
Oh
things,
yeah.
yes.
which is
Very
why I want
nice.
to build stuff, because I want to build stuff that was more in that realm.
decisions, that you wouldn't be able to, like, I wouldn't be able to make those decisions, like.
Well, it takes time, right?
Yeah.
And I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to a few years ago, or years before that. And it's just at this point I've probably done at least a few thousand, different
Oh my God.
masters, right?
Yeah.
If not more. Or and every time it's like a puzzle. I find every mastering project is almost like this puzzle that you have to solve. And every time you do it, it's sort of just another piece of experience that I have in the back of my head that I can kind of go back to on a future project.
So just to touch on a couple of things that you did bring up there. So number one, like for people who aren't familiar with this world as much, like the process that a mastering engineer takes affects the whole track that you're listening to. Whereas like if somebody's mixing, like when Reuben's saying, is the vocal clear enough? Is it full enough? Like if you're a mixing engineer, you could just turn the vocal up without affecting anything else. But what a mastering engineer has to do at that point is they have to say, well, the part of the vocal that I want that I can maybe boost is like in the 3 to 5K range, and I'm going to bump that up. But that's also going to brighten the guitars. So there's a big balancing act there. And so that's why you'll see, people's mastering change, they're like boosting 0.3 dB at whatever frequency. It's like, is that doing anything? Well, yeah, it's actually doing a lot because it's affecting every component of the track, right? So it's actually cumulative. It's a huge difference. So the second thing is, which is so interesting, is the quote unquote loudness wars, which I want to say was more of a 2010s through, or maybe even like a 2000s to 2010.
Yeah, I was thinking it was more. I think its peak was probably around 2005, 6.
Yeah,
maybe. I mean, it's still there. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's more of an understanding of it now. So you don't get things that are completely destroyed as much.
So can you speak to what that was and what that resulted in and where we're at kind of now?
Well, it was just, psychoacoustically, I think humans, anytime something's louder, we kind of perceive it as better.
Yes.
That's just the way it is. That's the way, we hear things. And so people just wanted their record to be louder than the next guy's record, right? Whether it was on the radio or in CD shufflers. If you remember back in the 90s, they have these 100 CD shufflers, things like that. And people, you'd want your record to be louder. Or I think more importantly would be on, at a radio station when they would have their programming meetings and listening to new music, putting on new stuff. You wouldn't want your track to come on really, really quiet if they were, if they're deciding what they're going to put on the air. Or in a grant application meeting, like an awards meeting, all these things where, you might have a room full of people pre-COVID.
Yes.
People actually in a room listening to stuff.
Yeah.
COVID probably hasn't affected your job that much at all.
No, for me, I work by myself. It's great. Yeah. But the idea is, you don't want your track to come in quieter because a lot of people would just perceive that as worse, right? So now, this has been an issue, since vinyl days. This is not a new thing. It's just that with vinyl, there was a physical limitation. At a certain point, the needle would just, skip and would come out, and you just couldn't go any louder. That's not the case with CDs. you can put whatever you want on a CD. It'll just distort.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And there was a point, I think, in the early 2000s, up to probably about 2008-9, where you would put on a record and it was just straight up distortion.
Yeah.
And it seemed like it was loud, and I guess it kind of was, but and that's where there was a lot of backlash, at least within the industry. Nobody cares. Outside the industry, nobody cares.
Well, right. Yeah.
But,
so so like as you approach, there's something called the volume ceiling. I'm wading into territory that I'm not 100% confident in, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
We'll talk about it later as well, too.
There's something called a volume ceiling, right? Which is just sort of, this is as loud as things can get in the digital world before you start experiencing distortion, and not in the way like not cool distortion, like a sweet old guitar,
Like
amp,
really bad
or,
distortion.
Yeah, like if you've ever heard
Yeah.
anybody like yell into a webcam mic or something, and it completely,
I'm not gonna do it now. I was very tempted to, but no, I won't do that to your ears.
and that's sort of something that came with digital, because an analog distortion kind of sounded good for the most part.
Yeah, or at least it's softer. Like
Yeah.
it's not this really harsh distortion.
Right.
Yeah.
It wouldn't always sound good, but it was better
Yeah.
than digital.
Yeah.
Whereas digital is like
Yeah.
100%. You never want digital distortion.
You know what we'll
You
do
know,
when we edit this? I think you should, for the people out there, just quickly
just
paste in
distort.
a hard clipping.
Okay.
You know?
I'll
I
try to
posted
do
an
that.
Instagram video intentionally that had hard clipping, and it was
yeah.
like it was
Yeah,
me
yeah,
live,
any
and I was
of
recording on
those.
my phone,
Yeah.
and people hated
Yeah.
it, and I was like, yes.
So there's ways to get around or like mitigate this issue, right? Because you can still get records somehow. You know, it's not just turn it all the way up as loud as you can, and that works. You know, it's like they're able to squeeze out a little bit more volume somehow. And this is where I don't fully understand, but by sort of, I hear tales of like mastering engineers mastering above zero, which is like above the volume ceiling, and then like converting it back down.
Yeah.
And there's different ways, but as you said, Reuben, it's like at some point you start having distortion that's noticeable. And I remember there was a record by Metallica. I want to say it was called Death Magnetic.
It was Death Magnetic. Yeah,
And
Death
people,
Magnetic,
like-
which was
I love
I
that
think
you
that was the
immediately knew.
first time it really it got into the public, like the wider public beyond sort of engineers. It was when that came out, and it was like, oh, what is this?
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Did they recall that and fix it, or
No.
it stayed that way?
No. So in the end, it's funny because I was actually looking into this a couple weeks ago for some reason, and I was reading some posts from back when that happened. Just going back, I think it was 2008, 12 years ago. My feeling on the loudest stuff and how much distortion or limiting or compression, to me that's an artist decision, right? To me, whatever. At the end of the day, the artist gets final say most of the time. It's pretty rare, even at higher levels, that someone's going to tell the artist, we're absolutely going to do this to your music, and you have no say, right?
Sure.
And and you might include that the producer might be part of that. Like when I say the artist, the producer, the production team might be part of these decisions. And in that case, Lars, I forget his last name.
Lars Ulrich.
There's Ulrich.
Yes, he put out a statement and said, "This is what we wanted it to sound like. The mixes sounded like that before the mastering stage.
Okay.
And I think Ted Jensen mastered it and even said like that's how it was mixed.
I didn't know any
And
of
even after all the complaints, Lars was like, I just put it on the car and it sounds awesome. And he's like, this is what I wanted it to sound like. And so I think at that point, I think for us, it's who are we to say that artistically that's the wrong decision? That's their art, right? They wanted it to sound like that. I don't like it, but that doesn't matter. I don't have to like it, right?
Correct.
To me, it's like I'm sure there were people, when they first heard Hendrix, were like, "Man, turn that distortion off, man." What?
Right.
Like, what is that? Like,
So,
what's
Or there are
that
people that
feedback? That's wrong.
can't listen to screaming. You know what I mean? Like music with screaming, and
Like
it's like,
screamo,
I can't
exactly.
enjoy that. But some people love it. Yeah,
exactly. And at the end of the day, that was what they wanted. No one forced them into that. Right?
Yeah.
Like no one's telling Metallica what to do. Let's put it that way. There's nobody on the production. There's no
Lars
mastering
gets so
engineer
much
in
shit.
the world.
Lars gets so much shit as a drummer, and I'm like, man, he's in Metallica. Like they if he was bad, they would have gotten rid of him 30 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That's what they want, and you don't have to listen to it. Right.
Yep.
No one's forcing you to. Right.
Yeah.
You can listen
Just
to
because he
something
doesn't
else.
know how to read music, who gives a shit, man? Sounds great.
So just to one more thing, just to cap this off, this particular topic. Semi-recently, Apple Music, Spotify, programs like that have sort of, have they set a limit, or have they done something where it sort of reels back in the desire to push to the absolute ceiling of loudness?
In theory, yes, but no.
Okay.
So, most of them now have a certain sort of normalization going on where they try to have a target level and they adjust everything to that level, so that if you got, if you got a Spotify playlist and you're playing through it, it's not jumping up and down too much. In theory,
Right.
first of all, they all have different targets. Every streaming platform has
It's got to be a
target.
headache.
Yeah. Two, you can turn it off. Like I turn them off on mine. I don't have it because I want to just hear the record as is. So people can turn it off. Three, they don't always publish exactly what they're doing, and there are plugins and sites that will give you these kind of general targets. But my experience has been that it's not super accurate, and because because the industry as a whole hasn't decided on one specific target, you can't just rely on it. So a few years ago when this started coming out, I would have clients asking me saying, hey, okay, this is just going for streaming. Let's just attempt for this specific target. I said, no problem. That's my job. Like I said, I'm a service business. So I said, okay. And you know what would happen? They would put it on a playlist and it was super quiet. With the normalization, with all the stuff, and the quiet records are still quiet, the loud records are still loud. The difference might be a little bit more like this, but that's what happened. And what you'll find is with the major labels, they still want them loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not distorted. Like, you'll get bounced back from like the production team if I send stuff out that's distorted.
Yeah.
And over compressed, but everyone wants it loud.
Sure.
Yeah.
Everyone wants a loud record.
Oh, yeah.
It's a funny thing. Like I didn't believe it when I read about that. I didn't believe it at all. And like I'm not a great mixer or anything, but as soon as I did mixing, and even just with guitars, you hear a really quiet guitar amp in a store versus one that's just blaringly loud, and it's like, the loud one sounds amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. And so a lot of it's psychoacoustics, right? So I think this is where people run into problems, and why in the early days of those loudness wars things sounded really bad is that I think people hadn't developed the techniques to get things loud, and a lot of it's not about just squashing things and getting a high RMS level with your stuff, because you can have something that looks loud on a meter and sounds really small. And I've seen records that'll actually measure way lower and sound huge and sound big, and they jump out of speakers. And that's also why I don't really care much about these targets, because they're not fully accurate in terms of how we hear.
Sure.
Right. So
it's more complicated.
It's more complicated, way more complicated,
or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. You just got to use your ears at the end. Yeah.
It always comes back to that. Just use your ears.
Yeah.
I have a question, and this may be a dumb question, but in terms of mastering or just mixing, do you have any records that you listen to and you're like, this is like a work of art, like from like a sonic perspective, beyond almost even like the music, like?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're tied. Like they go together.
Yeah.
So like, I any records that I use as a reference, I've got to like musically, because if I don't like it musically, it's, to me, they're one and the same to me. Yeah. That's why, I mean, like back when I was coming up, like at school, a lot of people used to use Steely Dan's Aja as like an engineering masterpiece. And I could not, and to anyone who likes that record, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I cannot listen to that record.
Al's a Steely Dan fan.
The Dan.
I can't. I was like, so boring.
Yeah. No, I feel you though. I accept that other people don't like them. Yeah.
I mean, I respect them, but I can't get into that, And so people were like, you should use this as an engineering reference. I was like, I do not want my records to sound like that.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Just trying to think off the top of my head. I recently a mixer producer named Sean Everett, who actually was in Banff at the same time, and he's now just killing it. And so a lot of the records he's done, He did the Alabama Shakes record from a few years ago.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's done a bunch. He was nominated just last week for 3 more Best Engineer Grammys.
Wow.
Yeah.
The stuff he does, it sounds great to me. Super loud and compressed, but I dig it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was a big fan of a mixer named Serban Ganea. I think that's how you pronounce it. I actually don't know. He mixes I mean, like if you go on the Billboard Top 40, I bet half of the stuff is mixed by him.
Yeah, okay,
Does a lot of Max Martin's productions, and he's a pretty low key guy. He doesn't do a lot of interviews or anything like that, but his stuff is just it's pop, it's top 40, but it just sounds great. Like it just yeah. He's able to find that balance between commercial and artistic taste that I think is just fantastic.
Do you do a lot of referencing like mid job? Like if I send you a pop track, are you pulling up something of his and sort of saying, all right, is this in the ballpark? Or do you sort of trust your ears and only go to it if you're having problems?
Yeah, I used to do that a lot more. And then I found that I was actually, it would cause me problems more than it would help. Because then you end up focusing more on that reference than the actual song that you're working from. And truthfully, at the end of the day, I think any piece of great music, should stand on its own. It should be its own thing, right? So I tried to not do that as much. So I'll usually just check it out later in the process, like maybe near the end, just to make sure that I haven't gone too far off one way or the other, and also just check levels and just say, okay, I know this is going to be on the playlist with this track, this type of music. How does it feel compared to those type of things?
Just see if they're in the same universe as each other, kind of
thing. Exactly. I just want to make sure they're there. And also, in a more micro scale, after I've been working on a track for 15, 20 minutes, mastering happens pretty fast. But even 15, 20 minutes, I might lose perspective. So it's sometimes good to just like put something else on and go, oh yeah, okay. I struggle with that
mixing because I've had so many aha moments where I've referenced a track and been like, okay, and I'll try to choose something that's so oftentimes a client will recommend. They'll be like, hey, these are a couple tracks that like I kind of like maybe, and sure enough, it's like, oh yeah, these songs sound pretty similar to the song that like not in a negative way, but it's like, yeah, these are a great fit. And I'll listen to it and I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't realize my vocals sounded so dark, or I didn't realize that my cymbals were so quiet or something, and it's just it changed. But then the flip side is also true, like you're saying, it's like, are you trying to recreate this song that you're referencing, or are you mixing the song that you're mixing, and you don't want to lose that staying true to that the music that you're actually sort of working on. So I haven't found the balance yet, but I have found it helpful from time to time to sort of I do find that I learn something new every time I do it. So there is that.
Yeah, I think it's valuable to do. Like I do think that everyone should do it. I mean, I know at least there are definitely mastering engineers who don't, and that works for them. I think if you're mixing, you definitely should. Just to make sure your vocals especially are in the right ballpark of where they should be. But I think as long as you find that balance of saying, okay, we need it to be in this kind of ballpark, but also try to bring whatever you're bringing, like whatever your unique things that you bring to the production, that you don't forget that. Like maybe, like for instance, you might have a reference track and you go, all right, this sounds great, but I just like more bottom end.
Sure,
that's okay, right? You're just like, I like to have the bass up a little bit more. Cool, right?
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I have so many questions, but like, one of the things that I find interesting is like, what does it take in a job, especially like in like our sort of like field of like music, to get into it in terms of like so many things like gear, in terms of like experience. Obviously we've already talked about that, but the gear thing is interesting with mastering. Like I know that a properly treated room is apparently super, 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 super important, but like gear wise, like what else do you need to be a mastering engineer?
You know what? I think there are really only a couple things you need. And I think this applies to mixing engineers too.
Yeah.
I have this theory that you really only need three things. You need really, really great monitors. Like you need to have, or at least a monitoring system. Doesn't have to be expensive. It could be. It just has to be a monitoring system that you trust and lets you hear music and helps you hear differences in tracks.
Yeah.
Like you don't want a monitor that's always bright or always dark. Something that allows you to hear contrast. You have to have great taste in music, and great it's subjective. It could be it just has to be great for your client base, right?
Yeah.
Like for the people that you're working with, you just have to be aligned with whoever you're working with. Then they have to agree, because obviously, if you think something's awesome, they don't, then that's not going to work out. If you think something's awesome, nobody does, you'll never be in business.
Yeah.
There's no business, right? But you can always find a niche, right? So I think developing your musical tastes and your sonic tastes, and then having those monitors that tell you, can allow you to hear that. And then the last thing is just you have to give a shit. You know what I mean? Like if you have good taste and you can hear something's wrong, you have to actually need to spend the time to figure out how to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And it's weird because I think there's people who don't do that. Like they know something's off, but they'll leave it to later. Like the recording engineers will leave it to the mixer. This mixing engineer will leave it to the mastering engineer. Yeah. And that never works out, right?
That's a good point.
But those three, I think you have those three things. That's all you need, because now the software, software is so good. Like you don't need hardware anymore. I mean, hardware's fun. It's great, but Reuben, who I just mentioned, has been mixing in the box since like 2004 or 5, before it was cool. Before the plugins were as good as they are now, and dude has more #1 hits than anybody ever, right? He's mixed more with 0 analog gear, right? So, it works for him. Not to say that analog, you shouldn't use analog gear. If it works, it's great.
Yes.
But you don't need it. So, like, those are the three things I think you need. They're
like really, really accurate, like good
monitoring system. Yeah, and that could be. I mean, you said the room, and the room obviously helps. But if you're on a budget, that could be a really good set of headphones, right?
Sure.
I wouldn't want to master on headphones, but I think you could mix on them.
I've been mixing on these for the last year. I haven't had room to set up speakers until right now, actually. So it'll be
literally today.
And honestly, with COVID, like this year, a lot of the engineers I've worked with have been mixing on headphones because they're at home often with their spouse, and they can't, either they don't have room, but you also can't just have music blaring if somebody else is working next to you.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of people are working on headphones, and if it's comfortable, if it works for you, that's great. Like for me, I wouldn't want to do it just because I think my ears would get tired, and
there is.
So I still prefer having.
Yeah, there's a bit of fatigue from I've been wearing headphones more than ever over the last 6 to 8 months, and there is a different kind of fatigue that comes from that. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, and like for me, I like to feel the bass in the room, and that informs my decisions.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's all, these are just tools, right? So that works for me. What works for me might not work for someone else. And,
man.
So, as a mixing engineer myself, again, engineer is not the right word for what I do, but as a guy who mixes records, trying my best here. So I find I don't know if you guys had this experience, but when the first time you recorded yourself maybe singing or playing an instrument, or had somebody record you and you heard it back, and it's like, wow, this is a magnifying glass on my playing or my singing. You could hear everything. I didn't realize I didn't realize my hand made that sound when I moved on the strings of the guitar or whatever. And it's like, you can hear everything. When I get my mix back from a mastering engineer like yourself, Reuben, now that magnifying glass on my mix, I'm like, oh man, I can hear all this stuff that I didn't realize. And like, I want to change this, I want to change that. And at that point, it's too late, obviously. But I mean, that's just the way it is. A record is never truly done. You just have a deadline, so you put it out.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm wondering, is there anything that you tend to get from mixing people that you sort of say, yeah, usually there's a build up at 300, for example, or like people
You asking for the secret sauce, Al?
yeah, well, or just like what to look out for, because I know like people. I don't know if this is a problem now as much as it maybe was in the past, but people sending stuff in that's too loud for you to work with. Is there anything that you could throw out there to us mixing folks to be like, hey, like if you do this a little bit more like this, it'll make everybody's life easier? I don't know if there's anything like that.
Well, I say, as far as frequencies, the bottom end is always like I almost always have to do some work in the bottom end because it's really hard to get a modern environment that really shows that accurately. Where I wouldn't say it's more or less like it's obviously everyone has slightly different things that need being adjusted, but I would say that's where I have to do the most amount of work. I would say the biggest. This is more of a suggestion than a critique on stuff. I think most people don't mix their stuff or listen to the stuff the way they actually ultimately want it to be heard. So my main suggestion would be, I tell people is you should think for your mix as if it was the last step. Like forget that there's going to be a mastering step down the line and just ask yourself, would you be happy if this went out into the world right now? Right?
Okay, yeah.
And even listen to it. Like take your mix and listen to it in the car or on headphones or earbuds or, a neighbor's house or whatever, right? And say like, are you happy with this? Yeah, and that includes level, right? And,
okay, yeah.
Yeah, like everything. Like you should almost imagine that it's going to the mastering engineer and you want to ask them for a flat transfer.
Right.
Like that, it's just which used to be more of a thing when there was a technical thing, like where you have tape and vinyl, and people would say,
"Okay,
we don't want you to mess
change
with
anything.
Just, don't change this. We just want you to put this on the other format." Now that's a little different, right? But a flat transfer would be like copy paste.
That would be so strange. We don't value your opinion at all. We just want you to I don't know,
like,
metadata
over here.
Yeah.
But that's the way I would go into it, right? And then the reason is there'll be less surprises because now you can always take the limiting off, right? Like I said, this includes levels. Like, so you should be at that level that you ultimately want it to be at. You don't have to send it to the mastering engineer like that. You can turn off the limiter before you send it to the mastering engineer, right? Or you could keep it on. There's people who are like, this is part of the sound. I just need you to do this thing, which is fine. If the level's good, that's fine. I don't have to turn it up. I just might make some other adjustments. And my work, and I think most mastering engineers, I think would agree with this, is like our work is best when we're enhancing rather than fixing. So if I get something in and I'm like, this sounds awesome, but you know what, man, this hook in the chorus, if I could just make that pop a bit more, this track will just be amazing, right? Yeah. And you can do that when you're really, really close. It's a lot harder when the track is way off and you got to do all this stuff and to fix it. So basically, my main suggestion was to just imagine that you're not going to be mastering.
Yeah, right.
And just hope that the mastering engineer comes back and says, "This is perfect. I didn't have to do anything."
Right.
I'd assume it would be almost the same advice that a mixing engineer would give a recording engineer that's not as good because like the whole fix it in the mix thing. It's like that's why it would be so cool to be in a position where you're recording a song and you actually have like a dope recording engineer who's like, I like this mic because of this, instead of like, well, I have an SM57 and I have a few condensers and that's what we got.
Right.
That's
crazy.
No,
it's absolutely the same. Like, if you could just turn up the faders and everything sounds awesome already, that's great, right? Because then you can just be creative. And it's like you're not taking up your brain process trying to fix technical issues. You can just, you can just, is it right? I always forget which is the creative side of the brain, right brain, left brain? I forget.
Something.
Left.
But I think left is creative.
Is it? Yeah. Whichever side is it?
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, actually. But whatever it is, like if you could try to be in that creative mindset more often, it helps, right? So like the less technical issues that we have to deal with, the better it'll be.
Right on.
I'm gonna look up what's
there are a couple of things that maybe are a little bit more how how would I say this? A little less exciting than talking about like cool audio stuff, but there are a couple of like, you know, things that do happen in the mastering process. I know there's like some metadata that gets embedded into the tracks. They are set to the appropriate sample rate, the appropriate bit depth, all that kind of stuff to go out depending on the medium, if it's going to be CD or I think streaming is 44.1 if I'm not mistaken. And then there'd be some other considerations there. So that's just like getting the title and it baked into the files so that when it gets played on the CD players that can read that, it'll display what the song's called or whatever, right? Is there any sort of other stuff? I guess the ISRC code is just to identify the song for royalty purposes.
That's
if
right.
It gets played on radio. How are those embedded? Is that like an easy sort of software thing, or is that a
it's actually these days it's super easy. It's like software, you put all the data in and it spits it out. And so that is that's part of another part of the process. It's what we call parts. So once everything's done and you have like your master, now you have your parts. Now you have your main 44.1, which would go for streaming, the same sample rate that CDs are at. But then you might have different sample rate for video. You might have radio edits, instrumentals, TV mixes. Like there's all these sorts of things. So once the main master is completed, then there's sort of like a technical side of the job that we have to do in terms of organizing everything. Also QCing, like quality checking everything, making sure that there's no ticks and pops and also that type of stuff. Then that I will use headphones for when I'm doing all that. Yeah.
And
and then, I would say, like in my case, I do all that myself. But in some of the bigger facilities, you'll have like a dedicated like engineer who will kind of take care of that side of things.
That would be that would be so upsetting to be like in a huge mastering studio, or like just a part of a big team, and it's like, oh, this is the guy that he just puts in the metadata. That's all.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I mean, usually it's an assistant, and I mean, hopefully they're getting paid. In this industry, that's not always the case. But any of the bigger facilities should be paying those guys. I would imagine. So it's a job, right? But it's also a way to get in there, and you get to learn, right? I did that a little bit of that at some of the studios I was there, and you get to listen to what the more experienced engineer did. And it might seem boring, but it allows you to kind of go, oh, okay.
Toilets.
Which I already also did.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's good hustle.
Yeah. Not paid for that either.
Yeah.
I was an unpaid janitor, basically.
Oh, no.
I won't name the studio. They're gone now.
Oh.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good riddance.
Basically.
I took a tour through a CD duplication replication plant, and the name's escaping me right now, but there was a fella in there, and his job was to listen to every fifth vinyl, because they do vinyl as well, so there'd be a run of X number of vinyls. He's like, yeah, my job is just to listen to every fifth one of these and make sure that it works, and like that's their quality control. It's like
it's just part of the quality control.
So
right?
I just listen to music all day. It's great. I was like, all right, sweet, man.
Yeah. Got to find the good in it, right?
Well, there's way worse gigs than that. I mean, I'm sure it's among other things that he would specialize in, but it was like, somebody does have to sit there and make sure that there's nothing funky going on, because sometimes these softwares, one of the worst ones I've had on this podcast was like half of the episode didn't render. It rendered the first half and not the second half, and there was I still cannot figure out why that happened, but it was like, well, now every time I upload the episode to the server, I just take 15 seconds to hit play, scroll every 5 minutes or whatever, just make sure, it's still there. Okay, cool.
I mean, sometimes
you just don't know.
Record
just don't. Are you guys using? Do you use Sequoia, or what do you use to?
I actually use Reaper.
Oh wow!
Believe it or not.
Really?
I know it's weird. I was an early. More mastering engineers are starting to use it now, but I started using it back in 2012, and before people did.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I was going to go to Sequoia. So I was using a program called Soundblade Sonic Solutions, which was the original
I
like mastering
remember
software.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was trained on early on, and I really liked it. I'm a Mac guy, but Soundblade just was buggy, and it sounded really good. Like there was it was weird. It had a sound to it that was great. And, but at a certain point, I was pulling out my hair when I had hair. It's gone now. Maybe from Soundblade.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it's like it just was. Yeah, it was brutal. And so I was actually thinking I was going to go Sequoia, and I was about to switch over to a PC, and I thought, let's just try Reaper. And you can just download and try it before you buy a license. And I was like, this does everything that Sequoia does for me, like that I needed it to do, and it costs like what, $200 or something for the license.
Is there an advantage to Reaper or Sequoia, for example, versus like Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, and in terms of the mastering domain? Is there functions that we don't have that you guys have?
Yeah, and I haven't used Pro Tools in a while. I don't know about Cubase and Logic, because I haven't used those in ages.
Yeah.
But as far as Pro Tools, and this may have changed because I haven't really used it since Pro Tools 10. It's been a while.
Yeah.
But back then, one, it didn't have offline bouncing, so if I need to render something, you had to do it all in real time, which is kind of a pain in the ass. When you assemble everything, everything's recorded into your computer after the analog chain. You've got clients in the room, and you've got an hour-long record, and they can't get their CD for an hour because you're sitting there. So there's that, and you can't. This doesn't affect me as much because I use a separate program for creating the CD, but Sequoia and Reaper can actually process a CD. You can make a CD directly in the program.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, where Pro Tools you have to export the tracks, then assemble it somewhere else. Like I said, for me, I assemble it in a different program called Hofa anyway. So I separate the process anyway. But you can, in Sequoia and Reaper, just have it in all in one program and just send it out. And then the biggest one, which, again, don't know if Pro Tools has changed this or not, but Sequoia and Reaper have a thing called object-oriented editing. Reaper calls it something different, but that's what it's called in Sequoia, where you can essentially put a plugin chain directly on a region or a clip. So often I have to treat, like, let's say the verse separately from the chorus. They might need slightly different treatments. And so I can just put an EQ or an entire chain on one section of the track, and it just goes smooth. Everything's like latency compensated and everything. And it's fantastic. Yeah. And I believe in Pro Tools, you would have to like use Audio Suite or something and process the file. And
you'd either have to render it or maybe like cut the track and put it on a different track, which shouldn't click and pop, but it could.
But you never know. Exactly. And you don't want to take that chance when you're mastering, right? So and it's that would just be slower, right?
Yeah, so it'd be a little cumbersome.
I think Avid's going down, man. Like they're just been shady lately. I tried to get Pro Tools 12, and I was like, I want to pay for this. I don't want to like rent it from you or like pay per month, and there's no way to do that. They offered me, they're like, we'll give you $500 off of the membership, but from now on it's membership only, and after that $500 is gone, you're paying the same as everybody else. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to buy it. It's the worst.
I guess that's
the way it's going.
That's the world we live in now. Everything's subscription.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know how much time you've got left, Reuben. We really appreciate you taking this.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I've got a bit of time.
I had a quick game I wanted to sort of play here, a little rapid fire. I've called it terms that people use all the time but don't understand. I'm going to throw them at you and see if you can define what they are. Number 1, dither.
Yeah.
What is it?
So like what is dither? That it's strange if you don't know what it is. It's literally just a bunch of random noise at a very, very low level that you apply to the audio. And I actually don't remember why this works. I know I studied it back when I was doing my
the science.
But essentially, when you're reducing the bit depth of something, let's say going from 24-bit to 16-bit, if you apply a little bit of dither, you actually end up with a little less distortion. So you're trading off. You added some noise, really, really low level noise that really no one would notice, but you actually end up with less distortion.
Do you use
That's cool.
Do you use dithering in your process often?
Yep. Yeah. So like when I'm producing the 16-bit parts, I will use dither.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay.
For that, yeah.
Next one is bit depth or bit rate, but I don't think bit rate is correct.
Yep.
I think it's bit depth, right?
No, bit depth is right. Yeah. So that's again the actual technical parts I may have forgotten exactly, but it's essentially the amount of bits, the amount of
zeros and ones,
basically resolution. Yeah, zeros and ones that are used for each audio sample, and it's directly correlated to actually dynamic range when it comes to the music. Again, 16-bit between 16-bit and 24-bit. The dynamic range. I think 16-bit's like 96 dB of dynamic range, so even classical records don't have that much dynamic range.
Yeah, right.
24-bit has like theoretically like 128, I think. I can't remember. So essentially, I mean, there's that from the playback standpoint. Technically, you have more dynamic range.
Right.
Whether it matters or not.
Whether you use it, yeah.
Yeah, but because you have more numbers to work with when you're actually using processes, like when you're processing in a DAW, when you have a higher bit depth, there's less sort of chopping off of numbers, and so you get a much more accurate representation when you're EQing or compressing or something like that. And so that's why I think most DAWs I think internally process at like 64-bit or even higher.
Oh shit!
And then they turn it
and
around.
then you only you only dither down right at the end.
I see. Oh, that's right. You know what? This is a little aside, but like I was getting really down the rabbit hole one time, and I was trying to figure out if it mattered if I clipped on my API compressor plugin on Pro Tools, because if the red light goes off, I was like, how much does this actually matter? Because you're watching videos and people are like redlining all over the place and they don't care, and I'm like, okay. So I null tested a clipped signal versus not a clipped signal, but like I gain matched them, and they nulled out. Mm-hmm. So I guess Pro Tools
when you're in a DAW, an actual engineer will have to come on and explain this stuff. But when you're in a DAW and they're using like what's called floating point precision, you can go above zero all you want and bring it down, and it won't matter.
Yeah.
It's only when you go to fixed point, which is what the delivery standards are, like the 16-bit, where it'll just go.
Yeah, I see.
So the red lights aren't the worst inside the session. All right.
Yeah.
Related to this, sample rate.
Yep. So that's basically the amount of samples per second that are being used to capture the audio. But I think people think of it incorrectly. Like a lot of people think that when you have more samples, it's more accurate representation, but that's not really the case because of the way sampling theorem works. Again, it's my first year digital audio course that I don't remember. I think I've got a textbook somewhere that will go into the nuts and bolts of that. But really what it is it's when you go to a higher frequency, it's not about more resolution in the time domain. It's you just get a higher frequency cutoff. So essentially,
I see.
So at 44.1, it's essentially half of your sample rate. So 44.1, you can't go above 22.05 kilohertz.
And we can't hear even that high.
Well, we can't hear, and that's why they chose it. What they found, though, is that, and this gets into digital theory, we need filters when we're sort of converting from digital to analog and vice versa. And those filters can affect the phase response and time domain response and stuff like that. And so when it's that close to what we can hear, like if you have a filter at 22K, you could probably hear that down to 10K, 8K, So it is so it's not so what they found was, or like some people found was, maybe that wasn't high enough, right? Not because we can hear higher, but if you go to, let's say, 96K, you can put that filter way above what we can hear, and it's not going to affect this. It's not going to affect the auditory range.
Because it would have some kind of downward exponential harmonic effect on the information below it.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, when it gets close. Yeah, and that's I think where people get it wrong, and I find it's like old school guys who don't really are still don't fully understand digital versus analog. It's what it is. What it isn't is it. Digital isn't about capturing a certain amount of steps and that's the resolution. It's it's hard to explain, but the way it comes out, we don't hear sort of discrete samples. Once it goes through the converter, we're hearing analog.
Right.
Digital's just just a storage medium, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Man, oh yeah, that just brought to mind. It always blows my mind that like sound can even be stored in the first place and like turned back into sound. Like it's completely magical to me even still. So like 96K, like is that worth it for anybody, or is 48 fine?
No, I think 96K is worth it. I don't know if 40K is high enough. I think back when they were initially doing the research, they found I think 60K was probably the good sweet spot. But they needed to fit a certain amount of audio on a CD, and this is like 1981 or 2 or whatever it was. So they ended up doing like 44.1, and then 48K I think is for video. No, not I think it is for video. I can't remember why I don't remember why they had those different rates, but because 60K is not a thing, we don't have it, and it's not going to be adopted anytime soon.
Yeah,
88.2 or 96K is probably the next step up. And I go 96K because it's just more of a standard than 88.2. So, and there's really no difference between those two.
Yeah.
So I just go 96 because it's at that 2x rate, it's more of a standard.
Do you think that as a mixer, I should be mixing at 96? Because that, I mean, kills your CPU, right?
Yeah, and that's the question, right? So it's a trade-off, right? So like the thing is, when you work at the higher sample rates, in theory, when you do things non-linear processes like compression, distortion, stuff like that, you're going to get less what they call aliasing, which is kind of what this distortion that sounds digital to us. When things sound digital, that's kind of what it is. And once you get to like 96K, that's pretty much non-existent. So you can actually get a much more probably analog sounding mix if you work at 96K.
It's crazy.
But then you cut your processing power in half.
Yeah,
and then so the question is, what trade-off is okay? But the thing is, most good plugins now will oversample and do their nonlinear processes up high and then bring it down. And so I don't know if it's that big a deal.
I see.
Sure.
To work at 96K anymore, because a lot of them will do it internally.
I see. Oh, that's very interesting. Okay, well, I got to look into this now. Now I'm going to go down the rabbit hole.
You triggered something.
The one thing about 96K is that I'm starting to hear that there are some labels that want 96K now. Not all of them, but I have had requests from some labels for 96K files. And obviously you can upsample it or whatever, but it's not really 96K.
Yeah.
I think they want a future-proof, maybe for future, revenue streams, streaming formats or download formats. And so that's one thing to consider. Like if you're a mixer, if there's a label, you might need to talk to them before getting started and see what their delivery requirements are.
That's a good call.
But I mean, even from the get-go, when you're recording, right, you would need to be recording at 96 to truly.
That's the ideal. If that was the case, if their delivery requirement was 96K, you want to start recording at 96.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, your plugins are running at 96, but the audio is still.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess it does make a difference, but not in the.
Yeah, you're not going to get the full benefit unless you're doing it from the beginning.
Yeah.
The question is how much of that benefit is, how important is it, and is it worth, maybe not having as much creative freedom,
right,
to work with in your process.
Having 10 plugins on your vocal,
yeah, exactly.
Okay, 2 more quick ones. Harmonic distortion.
Yeah, that's essentially just, if you think about sound, and we have, every sound is filled up with harmonics. So you have your fundamental and your overtones above that. Harmonic distortion is when whatever you're running it through adds harmonics that aren't there in the original signal. So if it's adding other like second or third harmonics or seventh, eighth, ninth, tenth harmonics, it's just essentially adding more to the signal that wasn't there in the past, and that could be good or bad depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Right on. And the last one, clipping.
Right. So clipping is like, if you think of a sine wave, right? Like if you think of just a pure sine wave, clipping is where at the top of the wave you just chop it off. Mm-hmm. There's no limiting, there's no compression, it's just gone.
Yeah.
You're chopping off the tops. Yeah.
And that can sometimes sound good, right? Like I know like mixers that use clippers to like sort of have an effect on things, right?
Well, it can sound better. It can sound better than limiting and clipping, or limiting and compression sometimes. Because one thing we have to realize, like, our ears don't react that fast. So sometimes there are transients that happen faster than our ears can perceive them. And so in that case, a clipper might be better because a clipper is just taking off the top of the waveform. And if that top of the waveform is fast enough that we're not perceiving it, we're not going to hear it as clipping. But we're going to be able to bring the volume up.
Mm-hmm.
There
from
you
a
go.
mastering perspective. Or you might be able to bring up lower detail, like on the snare, you might be able to bring up the ring on that or something like that. A compressor or a limiter, what it does is it'll see, there's a peak, and it'll bring the whole thing down. So it's not a limiter's not going to just take down that peak. It's going to take down everything that's below it as well. So there are times when you might not want that, and that's where tape, when people hit drums, like record drums to tape and hit it really hard, it's essentially clipping the tops, but leaving the bottom, that sort of tone section of the sound intact.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one related thing to this. So I've heard of this happening, and I'm not sure if you do this or not. And I've heard of other mastering places that do this, but like, let's say I've got my mix bus, all my stuff's going through there, and I've got my bus where I'm going to print, right? And I put my mix bus at like half a dB above zero, so that it's actually like the red lights are on. It's actually clipping, quote unquote, in Pro Tools, and then it prints to the final track, having lost that half dB at the top. Like people have expressed that you can do that and not really notice, and that's like a nice little cheat way to like get it louder. Like, have you experimented with that, and what are your thoughts there?
I have. So I mean, you're clipping, right? That's all it is. It's just hard clipping, right? And of course, and on some material, of course, you can get away with it, right? The question is whether you want to send something out that you haven't heard properly. And that you're not listening to as you're mixing. Mm. Because if you're doing it that way, you're not hearing the clipping. That's eventually going to happen, right?
Sure.
And maybe it's inaudible, right? Maybe, but maybe it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually going to, audibly clip.
Right. So you just have to listen to it after the fact and see if it made a difference or not.
Yeah, like, I mean, if it were me, I would rather just use a clipper plugin.
I see.
And to get that half dB extra, then at least you can hear it.
Yeah. And
you can make decisions in the mix based on that. Because, like, maybe everything's cool, but there's this one section where you hear, like, the kick drum clipping. And if you can hear it, then you can adjust the kick drum for that one section, and the whole track's clean.
Right on.
Right. Whereas if you did it the other way, you might not know until later.
Yeah, I got
you. Yeah, but it works. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Right on, man.
Wow.
One other thing I wanted to tell me if we're running out of time here, but are there any ear training exercises for people to better understand the frequency spectrum and how to hear, which each sort of zone and from 100 hertz to 20K, or I guess 40 hertz to 20K, to better understand and better identify what's going on in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, as like we mentioned earlier, when I was at McGill, we actually had a full 2-year program on that, where there was like a computer program, and they would help train us into identifying those ranges. There is a program, I think it's a book / program that's out there by a guy named Jason Corey, who also went to the McGill program, and I don't remember where he's teaching now, but I believe it's called technical ear training or something like that. But I bet if you just Google Jason Corey and the ear training, that would come up, and that's what I would recommend, just because that's what I've used in the past.
Nice.
I'm sure there are others out there that are just as good, but I would start there.
Okay, right on.
Yeah.
I'm out of questions. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to touch on, or anything you want to sort of talk about in terms of your services, how people can reach you? Got any like Cyber Monday promotions you want to?
Promotion. Is it Cyber Monday still?
I don't know. According to the car dealership.
No. Well, people can reach me either through my website, mojitomastering.com, or through Instagram, which is also, well, actually, that's just my name, Reuben Ghose. I think those are probably the best ways, Instagram or my Facebook. Sorry, Facebook. Facebook too, actually. But Instagram or my website, are probably the best ones. Yeah.
Perfect. Can't recommend highly enough if you're an artist or a producer or a mixer. And first of all, if you're not using mastering, you should. I personally think you should be, for the reasons that we stated before, just because it is sort of a final process, a finishing touch, a second pair of ears. And I just think it's an important part of the process, and it's very worth doing. And if you are going to do that, please go to Mojito Mastering. Reuben's awesome, as you could tell from this podcast. And he'll work with you and make the track sound good. And it's always a blast. So.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah,
and I will say, just to touch really quickly on what you said, but I agree that people should be mastering with us.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, I'm also don't. I remember that there's some mastering issues get really adamant about that, right? And I don't think it's a problem for people to, like, if you want to master your own stuff, that's fine. Like, I don't think there's any reason why not. The reason you would use a mastering engineer, like, you just ask yourself, are you getting the results that you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Are you happy with what you're getting? Are you happy with the way you're sounding? Are you achieving your career goals? And if you're not, is there something sonically in your recordings that might help there? All of those things are reason to go to a mastering engineer. But at the same time, I'm actually completely okay with mastering your own stuff. It's just you have to identify yourself whether a separate mastering engineer, another person, would be able to help you. And I think in most cases, they can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, also, you said getting a second pair of ears, and it's like,
exactly.
You get a second pair of ears, and it's like, oh yeah, I got my guitar player to listen to. It's like, cool, yeah, he's gonna maybe hear some stuff, but it's like you're getting a second pair of ears those ears, their job is to listen to thousands of things, like your 1,000 things that you've mastered, and make these tweaks that, to be honest, I can barely hear some of the tweaks, but I know that they're being made. And like, it's like, well, if I can't hear them, or maybe some of the tweaks I can't hear, it's like, well, then do you need to make them? And it's like, well, these things are perceived like definitely on a subconscious level, people can identify a bad mix. And they maybe won't go, oh, that's a bad mix or a bad master, but they'll go, yeah, this song is not that good, Well,
well, actually, like as an example, I was listening to a track the other day that wasn't mastered by myself, but I was just evaluating it, and it was a great master. And what I found, what was interesting about this, was that the master was actually quieter than the reference mix that the mixer had done. But what the mastering engineer done was really brought out this really catchy hook in the chorus that the guitars were playing, and the bass was kind of doubling it as well. And so even though the master was quote unquote quieter, it actually grabbed your attention more, and the hook was there, and I think it keeps you engaged. Like as a listener, I was like, I'm I would much rather listen to this, and I think I would actually, even on a subconscious level, just remember this track more because the hook came through so much more, whereas the other one was louder, but just everything was smashed and not quite as clear. And,
it's absurd how much this stuff affects stuff. Like the more I learn about it,
thing that it's not something that someone might, like the average listener, would identify, but on a subconscious level, that's what gets people listening to music.
Well,
right?
Why do people like louder music? They're not going, well, I like this more because it's louder, but you know, when they hear a louder thing, they feel it more. You know,
they feel it, right? And that's what it was in this case. It was like the quieter one actually grabbed your attention more, even without volume compensating. Just listening to back, back to back.
Well,
but that's the type of subtle thing that this mastering engineer was able to do for this client.
This stuff is just so cool. It's just the more I learn about it, it's the coolest shit ever. In the nerdiest way, but it's the coolest shit ever. You know, like
the coolest things are also the nerdiest things. By the way,
this is right. Like if magic were real, it would be nerdy as fuck. You know.
So, I just to build on that, it's like, it's not that we can't hear it. It's like I've run into this so many times as a mixer. It's like I know there's something wrong, but I don't know what to do to change it.
Yes.
Because I just don't have that experience. Or
why doesn't your track sound like that thing on the radio? Yeah.
So like, and it could be just like, man, I remember I was at a mastering studio way back in the day, and the gentleman there was like, I showed him this mix I was working on. It was unrelated to the project at hand, but it just came about. And he's like, man, if you just cut like 2 dB at 250, like watch this, you know, snap cuts it. I was like, whoa, you know, this thing is like this track's killing all of a sudden. So it's like, but I didn't know that, and this was like 10 years ago. Like I just didn't know to. And that's not going to work for every track, but it worked for that one, right? And so this is when people like yourself, Reuben, have the ears to go, this just needs half a dB out at 350, you know, boost a little 5K. All right, there you go. Whereas the mixer, you know, if I master my own stuff, I'm just going to master it the same way I mixed it. I'm going to add more.
Right, yeah.
I'm going to add more of the stuff I was adding in the first place. That's not necessarily going to. So I think it's more. You know, it'll come back and I'll be like, yeah, this is killing, but I won't know why or necessarily. Or I won't know.
That's a much better way of putting it. It's true.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the same as guitar players who have those pedals they don't really understand. Like I was talking about Brent Mason. He has this one pedal. It's an the EP booster, and it's just from an Echoplex preamp or whatever, and it's just the preamp. And he's like, I don't even know what this does, but I just leave it on. I just like the sound of it. You know, he's not going like, well, it adds saturation and it boosts this. He's like, I just like the sound. You know.
Right. Yeah.
And that's enough sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, we'll let you go, Reuben. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you guys.
This was super, super fun.
Well, thanks for having me. This was fun. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Once again, Mojito Mastering here in Toronto. If we didn't mention this already, this is a process that's completely touchless, as it were. Like you send your files over to Reuben. He does his thing. He flips them back to you. If you need a revision, you flip them back to him, and he flips them back to you, and it's done, right? You don't need to go into a studio. You don't need to travel anywhere. So it is a super convenient, super sort of streamlined, swift process. So definitely check it out, mojitomastering.com. Yeah, man. All right. So we're going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you would like to reach out to us, we are musicguypodcast@gmail.com. The website is musicguypodcast.com for all the past episodes, and present and future. And I am at Alro Music on social media. Michael is at Bruno the Meek on Instagram. And
Fun times.
we look forward to seeing you guys again next week for another episode. Bye for now.
That was great. These are the questions that I've wanted to ask ever since I started learning about these things.